Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Tonight, I have a couple things to go through, or this morning. Since this is my new gig, basically until I can get my other business going, I'll just be podcasting because, well, I enjoy the heck out of it. We're during the Christmas break, and maybe I just get a little more famous to get my podcast launched even more. My name is Sean, and welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. What we're going to do is we're going to try to drop these the night before, going through some news of why we should actually be paying attention. Most of us in the 2A community are very happy to just do our own thing. The news is the news, and I've put a lot of politics into this podcast, which I know my dedicated followers appreciate that. But I do this because ultimately, whether we like it or not, if you're a 2A guy, you have to be into politics. So, what's going to happen? The first things I'll do now, I'm going to start running through a couple stories. So this may be a little longer podcast than normal. I'll run through a couple of stories that are in the news, things you should pay attention to as a 2A community member. Please check us out on Facebook, New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union there. And like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. Now, let's get started. So, as you saw in those weekends, one of the big omnibus bills that was passed had the NDAA in it. What that is there's National Defense Authorization Act is what that stands for. And in this, there's some, what always happens with the United States and American citizens is every time you allow the government to make something too big to read, but then they have to vote on it right away, you end up with something like this. So what has happened? In the NDAA Act that just passed, there is gun control hidden. Now, this is a marginal loss, but it's still a loss for us, and it's a marginal win for the left. What it is Safe Storage Act. Now, if you've lived in New Mexico or you've lived in anywhere behind the blue line of states that are kind of anti-2A, you kind of saw this coming, just like the red flag laws. These are the things that the NRA and a lot of our own people sell us out down the river for to allow gun control in. What they fail to understand is any allowance in means that we'll never get that freedom back. So I'm not okay with this. How you store your weapons, I would hope, would be safe and secure. However, it's nobody's business in the government at all whose or how you're dealing with your weapons. So let's talk about marginal losses and marginal wins. So one of the marginal wins, I would say right now, and it's only marginal because it's not permanent, or that it hasn't been made permanent yet, is that Oregon's bill is on hold because of GAO, Gun Owners of America's lawsuit that actually stops them from enacting the draconian measures that they're trying to do with House Bill 114 that they call it. Now, in that, it's really, really granular. You have to have a background check to get a gun. That's not a big deal. But then law enforcement has to do another background check. They do a social media search. Then you have to apply for training. And then this is not just for one firearm. This is every time you do a firearm, my understanding. Or every time you are to purchase a firearm. This becomes onerous to me, and I could see this being struck down. We can all hope and pray, but we'll see. Kind of a shock to me, but not really. Oklahoma is looking at arming teachers. Now, I have very mixed feelings about this. Now that I'm not under the umbrella of where I used to work for anymore, I can tell you I've actually experienced the shooting, and I can tell you I don't know that I want some teachers owning firearms, I said that out loud, but I don't know that I want them having firearms near kids. Number one, during the shooting we had in Aztec, we had set of users, a set of staff members that were so panicked and afraid that they armed themselves with whatever they could, clubs, golf clubs in one case. But the point being is that one of these teachers almost attacked the good guys coming to help her. Now, I understand the stress of the situation, but it would have been complicated a lot more if they were armed. And more bullets in an environment where any bullet is a bad plan is probably not a good thing. So where do I err with this? Truthfully, I hate to say it, I'm okay with arming people in schools. A lot of people aren't. And this is part of the reason why I had to separate is over time when you have woke agendas, you keep seeing stuff coming in from the news, you get tired of being battered. And that's where I was in the educational space. When it comes to this particular topic, there was great discussion after the shooting about arming people and about getting armed staff there. And a lot of people don't like this. And I understand. Think about it. From the libertarian perspective that I have, which is to spread and maximize freedom everywhere, I don't want to normalize my kids being around firearms. Well, not like that. I don't want them to normalize seeing a cop in full garb everywhere they go. That's what I'm afraid of. My kids are normalized to firearms. My youngest kid, who's 16, we went shooting today, and we had some discussions, and what was really hilarious is he's been shooting since he's been 3 or 5 years old. Now, when he says that, I say, yes, sir. But what I actually mean is I introduced them to this because I was my overwhelming goal with kids and firearms when I finally got kids involved in my life was to do one thing. Normalize it so much that if they went to somebody else's house and somebody says, hey, check this out, and they were curious, that my son or my daughter or my other son would stop them and say, no, let's not mess with that. That's a bad plan. Or B, if it came to that, they would be able to disarm the weapon, make sure it was safe and everyone was safe in general. Now, I see this more as an effective way to combat kids messing around with guns and shooting themselves than what the media is doing. Demonizing anything, from what my perspective has been as a teenager when I was a young kid and having raised 3 kids now, is that anything you say no to, they're more curious about. So the best way to do this is to stigmatize the firearms. Now, people say that about sex. I would say that's between you and the kid, and you should feel it out. And when I say that, age appropriateness is a big thing when it comes to sex with me. I did have the discussions with my kids, but it wasn't gratuitous, and it wasn't really bad. And what I mean by that is, yeah, it's uncomfortable as a parent, but it's something you have to do. And guns are no different. Same with drugs. This is why you're a parent. You have to be the freaking adult. And the educational system would be a lot better if more parents were engaged with their kids. I'm just going to be flat out honest right there. But arming teachers isn't a bad plan if they're trained. And when I say trained, the level of training I would expect would be close to what an air marshal would get. And why I say that is because I believe firmly we should be guarding kids with firearms, because they are the most valuable resource we have in the world right now. And as such, they deserve to be guarded and sheltered, in my opinion. Now, with that, though, comes a hell of a lot of responsibility. If you're going to carry a gun anywhere, okay, it is your right, but I would highly, highly recommend, and I don't know any firearms guy that doesn't say the same thing, go get trained. It's one thing to go to the range once a year, pop off a few rounds and say you're okay. It's another thing to go to a training class and pop off 500 rounds in a day or in an hour, to get the muscle memory and training you need to get to where you're very proficient with these firearms. And if you're going to be around something as valuable as a kid, I want you to be as effective as possible. So what I would have thought, or one of the proposals that came out, and I was really hoping that we would have done it, but it's really unpopular to have any type of firearms in schools. And in New Mexico specifically, there's a lot of legal restraints around insurance. If you get a firearm on campus, they won't insure you. Okay? Most schools can't operate without insurance. So, arming teachers, cool. I would say there's a lot more administrators that I think are more capable, as well as, believe it or not, custodians and maintenance dudes. Never underestimate how many of those guys are on campus at any time. Never underestimate how many of those guys have either tried out for the armed forces or were in the armed forces, or even in my case, where I came from, we had several that were in the sheriff's office at one time or another. So these guys have already qualified. They're already gun guys, and they're everywhere. Think about the maintenance dudes that are maintaining the air conditioning systems. Think about the dudes that are, making sure the facilities are just awesome. These guys I could see doing that, as well as having a security force. The other thing you need to do, harden your campus. I've talked about all these things before. I'm not going to beat this to death. It's just interesting to see more and more schools go that way, and more blue schools go the opposite way. And when I say blue schools, blue state schools. New Mexico, this is highly, how do I put it? A hot topic of the level of which that reaches the House and the Senate and the governor. So, with that, New Mexico PED has started trying to get funding to make sure schools could be safer with on-prem security forces or retired law enforcement people there. This is good and bad, and I'm not going to go into that. Let's move on to the next phase of the podcast. Cool stuff in the news. So one of the coolest things I saw, and I'm only going to cover this one thing before I end the podcast because I think we've already went a little long, is the FN SCAR pistol was released. Now, with the ATF saying no to this type of pistol and them wanting to go after braces, and then it seems like that law that was supposed to have dropped in December doesn't seem to be there. There must be a lot of pushback, which I had hoped for anyway with the braces, because the braces, well, I've said this before and I'll say it again, Freemen don't ask for permission. Therefore, I don't know what you're going to do with your brace. You do you. Don't take any actions based on what I say, unless I say go out and protest at the roundhouse or at the cities that you live in to talk about the Second Amendment. But it also means that there's yet another entry into that braced pistol category, because most people find the utility of a shorter, handier carbine to be something that's very intuitive and interesting. And what I mean by that is if you live in a small town, or you live in a town or a city, having a full-fledged, 38-inch long or 40-inch or 42-inch long rifle to move in a city is kind of a bitch. And I say that not being mean. If you've ever trained and you ever actually do something like go in and do a house clearing drill with a carbine, can you do it with an AR-15? Absolutely. In fact, it is easy to do with an AR-15. But then if you could take 4 to 6 inches off that AR-15, but use it the same effectiveness and have all the accoutrements like lights, lasers, and foregrips and everything else while you're going through that type of thing, you've got a really handy package that someone can't reach out and just grab a hold of. Thus enter the pistol caliber carbine into the lexicon, but it also goes one step farther with the pistol caliber carbine. A lot of this was 3-gun led, but the other thing that was there in the background is we have a lot of shooters that are recoil sensitive, and shooting a pistol caliber out of a rifle makes that caliber or that rifle have less recoil. That means the user is going to be less affected by it. Smaller frame people shy of gun shy of recoil, like my son, some smaller frame females, this is a thing. So, if FN, the manufacturer that makes weapons for the military, is willing to produce this for the civilian market right now, it gives me hope that they won't pursue any stupid laws other than that. Also, in the cool stuff category, I got to take my son out to the range today, and we shot one of my G3s, one of the MP5s, his AR-15, and two different 22 rifle and a 22 pistol. I took him out because he wanted to shoot the MP5, and he wanted to shoot my G3 again, and he wanted to do the HK slap. And he hasn't gotten to do a lot of practicing lately, so he has an AR-15 that I built for him a long time ago, and I gave it to him when stuff started getting, or I gave it to his mother specifically, when things started getting dicey and we weren't sure how the pandemic was going to go. This is something that my dad kind of encourages, or did, that we keep our family taken care of, and my kids have been training. I would put my kids up against some of the better marksmen that I've seen. They actually could do really well, especially my daughter. My daughter is scary effective when she wants to be. But I digress. There's a lot of other cool stuff. I've talked about the MSBS before, the Grot, or the Grod from Poland. It's their entry into the 5.56 world, and Ian from Forgotten Weapons got to shoot both versions, both the Bullpup and the other version that's going out. It'd be great if FB Rodham brought it to the United States, but in this political environment, I don't know. However, Poland's a pretty good ally, so there is that chance. Just some cool stuff on the radar, things to be watching for. Keep checking on the news. Please like, share, subscribe, and be great. We also have Rumble videos where we show anything where we go to a range and I actually record video for. I didn't today because my son was more so interested in just shooting and not worried about the podcast. As I said, like, share, subscribe, be great.